Hopefully I can figure out how it works. All right, so that's what this chapter is about, is metabolism. And so just an overview here. So the living cell, which we're made up of billions of, is like a miniature little chemical factory where all these different reactions occur. Thousands of reactions occur any given second, and all those reactions need to occur fast enough for us to, for our cells to simultaneously stay alive, and therefore us to. And so these reactions, some reactions the cells get energy from. So the cell extracts energy and applies energy to perform work, and that work is what is going to keep our cells alive. And some of that conversion, that energy can be converted to other types of energy, and one type of energy that it can convert to is bioluminescence. We do not bioluminesce, so that would be very cool, but we do not. That means that the organisms make a protein that is kind of like a glowing. And I bring this up to show that energy can be converted to from one type to another. And also, just to bring this up, because we'll later on in the course be doing a lab. It's one of my favorite labs of the year, where we're going to take a bioluminescence gene from a jellyfish. So this is what this picture is, a glowing jellyfish. We take that out of the jellyfish, so they, out of all the DNA, snip out just that bioluminescence gene, and we can insert it into another organism, and we're going to insert it into bacteria and grow bacteria, and the bacteria will form us. All right, and so that's really cool. So let me be clear about this. I order the gene already extracted from the jellyfish. So we're not going to have jellyfish. All right, as cool as that may be, we don't have the equipment to like do all of that. All right, so we're not going to have the actual jellyfish here. We're just going to have the gene and the bacteria. All right, so.
Is there any potential that we can learn to inject that into like?
Did someone just say let's go gene shopping?
Yeah, you can. Yes. We'll talk about genetic technology later on during that thing, but yes, we can put genes from other organisms, into other
organisms. Like bioluminescent gene, like specifically?
Well, you could, yeah. Actually, that's one of the things that when you do that lab, the questions at the end, one of the questions is to find the application. All right, so then the first section is about energy, transformation of energy, and something called the laws of thermodynamics. So, definition of metabolism. Total of an organism's chemical reactions. So lots of different chemical reactions going on. Collectively, we call that your metabolism. So this is the property of life that arises from interactions between molecules within the cell. So remember that a chemical reaction, a molecule doesn't go, ooh, let's go over here and react with this molecule. That they have kinetic energy, it's random motion, and when they come into contact with one another, a chemical reaction can occur. All right, so that's how that works. And so if you have a higher quantity, a higher concentration of these molecules, then they're going to run into each other more often. You'll have more chemical reactions occur. All right, so when we look at metabolism and chemical reactions, a lot of our reactions occur in what's called a metabolic pathway. A metabolic pathway begins with a specific molecule and ends with a product. The beginning, we end with a product. What's at the beginning of the reaction? What do we call those molecules?
Substrate?
They can be called substrates, especially when they're interacting with an enzyme. But collectively, sometimes we call those reactants as well. And so you have a beginning and an end, and then each step in this pathway is catalyzed by catalyzed means speed up, by a specific enzyme. So an enzyme helps to make this occur at a fast enough rate so that it keeps our cells alive. And so that's what this picture here is showing you. So they're saying here, your starting molecule, this is your reactant. Reactant A gets converted to B, that's reaction 1 catalyzed by enzyme 1. B gets converted to C, that's our second reaction catalyzed by a different enzyme. and then C eventually gets converted to D, again catalyzed by a different enzyme. And so enzymes are very specific. So you're right, Sage, that this enzyme, this would be the substrate that this enzyme is working on to convert it to be to speed up that reaction. Now, oftentimes in living things, when we have a long pathway, we don't really necessarily always write these steps, which are called the intermediate steps. Oftentimes you'll see a pathway just written like A gets converted to D. The beginning and the end. This is your beginning reactant, and this is your end product. And what this arrow really does is represent many steps in between. So they're kind of giving you the big picture. Let me give you an example of that. An example of a pathway that we do is cellular respiration. Cellular respiration is breaking down glucose to get energy for your cell. Glucose, if you recall, C6H12O6. So we take a glucose molecule, and in order to break it down in cellular respiration, we need a gas molecule. Anybody know what that is? It's oxygen. If you don't know this next chapter, you'll know all you ever want to know about it. All right, so it needs an oxygen, so those are your reactants. And then we have an arrow, and then we get our products at the end. The products are 6H2O and another kind of gas, which is carbon dioxide. And the thing is that it also releases energy. And this energy can do cellular work. And so when we break down that molecule, we can get energy to do cellular work. So this example here, when we see this reaction, which we'll see a lot next chapter, has this one arrow. It makes it seem like this is one reaction. Like these two come into contact with each other, and boom, we get these two, and energy is released. That arrow actually has hundreds of different reactions to get there. So there's lots of different things that occur between these guys, the start, and these guys, the end. And so that's an example of how we shorthand a chemical reaction, but it's really a big pathway. And lots of different enzymes to catalyze all the intermediate steps in between there. So I'm going to leave this up to the cellular respiration reaction because we're going to refer to that quite a bit here in the notes.
When you say 6H2O plus 6CO2 plus energy, what form is that energy in?
Okay, good question. We're going to look at this a little bit more as we go on. All right, so all right, I'm going to hold that thought. Okay. Okay, so when we look at a metabolic pathway, there are two kinds. There's what we call a catabolic pathway. This, by definition, releases energy by breaking down complex molecules into simpler compounds. And then the opposite of that, by catabolic pathway, it's called an anabolic pathway. These guys consume energy to build complex molecules from simpler ones. So consume energy means it's taking in energy from the environment. It needs energy in order to do that. So I want to go through an example of catabolic and anabolic reactions in a visual way, which is this handout here that you picked up, this little picture here. Have you refer to that, and we're going to go over that and how it relates to catabolic and anabolic reactions. So here you have, this is the cell membrane. So this is inside your cell and this is outside your cell. And you have, and it has this little key here. So A, it says simple organic molecules. So let me give you an example of what that would be. So let's say outside your cell, so this is the cell of your body, but let's say that you ate some starch in a potato. All right, so you ate a potato. So you eat starch. What is starch chemically? What is the chain of? It's a long chain of glucose, right? So starch is a glucose hooked to a glucose, etc., ... all right, and so on. So when you eat starch, and it goes into your body, into your digestive system, does it stay as starch?
No.
No, we digest it. What does that mean? We break it down. What is starch broke down into? it breaks the bonds here between the glucose molecules. So no longer are they connected together. So now we digest starch. And now, instead of long chains of glucose, they are individual glucose molecules. So they're not connected together anymore. That's what these little dots are. This is the simple organic molecule. So that's like glucose. Glucose would be one of those simple organic molecules that you would get through your diet that can go through your bloodstream to your cells. Now, what we talked before in chapter 5 about 2 uses for glucose. Anybody want to give me one use for glucose? What do we use glucose for, Maddie? Yeah, we use glucose for energy. So it is it's a big energy molecule in our cells. So, and then what's the other thing we can do with glucose?
Wasn't it something about structure?
Structure, yes. So, or storage, all right? And so what happens is if we have a lot of glucose molecules, what we can do is store them and put them together. And so let's look at the first arrow here. So this is your glucose molecules, and it meets your cell membrane. Can the glucose go through the lipid bilayer? No, glucose is going to need a protein. I'm going to draw the protein here. All right, so here's your glucose in your cell now. Let's look at the first arrow. So there's 2 pathways, one for structure or storage, and one for energy. So let's look at this first arrow here. So pathway number 1 here. The glucose, which one of these, look at this arrow, and now it goes to a protein, fat, starch, phospholipid, and DNA. Which one of these have anything to do with glucose?
Starch.
Starch, right? And when we take in glucose, do we build a starch molecule?
If
We
need to
don't.
store it.
No, when we store glucose, we don't store it as starch. What do we store it as? It's close. It starts with a G. Glycogen. All right. So this is for plants. Plants would store their glucose as starch. So that's why when we eat a potato, we're eating starch. All right. And animals store their glucose as glycogen. So a little review over here from chapter 5. So what happens is we take in the glucose and we put the glucose, notice here, the simple organic molecules are being put together in chains. All right, so that's what we have here. So this is, we are storing it. So in this case here, we're storing glucose. So that's your storage. And notice here that there's protein, fat, DNA, phospholipids. What that means is that there are other simple organic molecules. I just chose to use glucose as an example. If you were to eat protein from a pig, all right, their pig's protein is a chain of amino acids. When you digest it, it's going to digest into amino acids. The amino acids go into your cells, and we can use those amino acids to build human proteins, okay? And so that's so we can build fats and so on and so forth. So that's just, I just chose one example. All right, so we're taking the glucose and building glycogen. This pathway from glucose to glycogen, would that be classified as an anabolic or a catabolic pathway? Look at your definition, if you don't remember off the top of your head. Catabolic or anabolic?
It's anabolic, right? Because it's going to
So glucose to glycogen, this arrow. Look, this, are we building larger molecules or breaking them down?
building.
This from glucose to glycogen we're building, which is anabolic. Now, if you cheated and looked at E says anabolism. Another way to say that is anabolic pathway. So this is an anabolic pathway. We're building larger molecules from smaller ones. Now, we wrote in the definition that this requires what? This requires energy, so where in the world does energy come from? All right, in comes the other pathway here. So glucose can also be broken down. So glucose, for this arrow here, this is our second pathway, glucose can be broken down. So I'm going to write here glucose broken down into, so glucose and C6H12O6, right? So think about that. Glucose is broken down into, What do we write on the board? Glucose is broken down into water and carbon dioxide. Those are your smaller molecules. So notice here what's going on. You have glucose, C6H12O6. There's energy in the bonds of that molecule. And so what happens is when we break glucose down into smaller molecules, there's not as much energy in water and carbon dioxide as there is in glucose. So if you end up with molecules with less energy, like you can't get energy from water, you can't drink water and without eating and stay alive, all right? We don't get energy from that. And so there's a lot less energy in these molecules. So where does that energy go? Energy, we can't make energy or destroy energy. So if you start out with a molecule that has a lot of energy and you end up with molecules that don't have energy, that energy is released. And so the released energy can be used in one of two different forms. So notice here the big plus and H. H is heat energy. In textbooks and so on, when you see this big like explosion thing going on, that's usually your indication that that's energy. All right, so heat energy is released. So, but then some energy, notice up here, this arrow here, this energy, this is energy that's available to do work. So what this does is energy to do work. So when the glucose breaks down into water and carbon dioxide, it releases some energy as heat, and some of that energy goes to do reactions or help reactions occur that wouldn't normally go without an input of energy. So So what happens is that when we break down the glucose, we release a lot of heat energy. Whenever we go through cellular respiration, we release heat. When you think about if you were to go sprint, all right, your body needs energy to do that for your muscles to contract and so on. So this energy that's being created by, or not created, but released by the glucose being broken down, some of that energy is going to do work, helping your muscle cells to contract so you can run your sprint. But some of that energy is released as heat, and this is why when you exercise or work your body, you get hotter, all right? A lot of that energy is released as heat. And heat is what we consider an unusable energy for living things. We can't take the heat and it's not helping us run our race or anything like that. The heat is then gonna go into the atmosphere and so on. So I'm gonna put here that this is unusable. But some of that can go to do cellular work. So oftentimes we call this energy coupling. A couple is two. Two reactions have to occur together. So this anabolic pathway that requires energy, that can't happen unless you have a catabolic reaction that's going to release energy to make that one happen. Okay? And so, so that's the relationship there. All right, so let's go on with that. So bioenergetics is the study of how organisms manage their energy resources. So how do they manage them? And so we're going to look at that here as we move on. So this little part here hopefully is a review, forms of energy. Hopefully at some point in your school career you've talked about energy. Energy is the capacity to cause change. Sometimes that change is the ability to do work. So energy exists in various forms, some of which can actually perform work. And in living things, heat energy is not one of those energies that is available to do work. So energy releases heat is kind of wasted up for a living organism. So types of energy. So we hopefully know, we talked about this in this class, kinetic energy, energy associated with motion. A type of kinetic energy is heat. Heat is also known as thermal energy. It's kinetic energy associated with the random movement of atoms or molecules. So we talked about that when we talked about diffusion, the molecules moving through water or through the air, and so on. So heat is a type of kinetic energy, and so I want you to realize that that is a type of kinetic energy. There's also potential energy. Potential energy is energy that matter possesses because of its location or its structure. So for instance, glucose has potential energy in it. It has stored energy in the bonds between the atoms of that molecule. And so this glucose is a ring, and it has this energy stored in the bonds. And it's the way that those atoms are put together that gives it that energy. And so that is a type of potential energy called chemical energy. So chemical energy is a form of potential energy available for release in a chemical reaction. So when those bonds are broken in glucose and the atoms reform to form water and carbon dioxide, the way that they're put together, now there's not as much energy in those bonds, so therefore the rest of the energy is released because energy can't just disappear. Oh, before I go on, real quick, because of its location, can somebody give me an example of how something could have potential energy because of its location? Nathan?
If you're on a high cliff and you drop something,
Yes.
it has energy because gravity's pulling down on it. You drop it in the earth.
That's right. All right, absolutely. So that's an example of potential energy as a result of location. Energy can be converted, we should know, from one form to another. So potential energy or chemical energy can be converted to kinetic energy, and so on. So this just gives you a real simple analogy of energy transformations. So you have this diver on this platform, has more potential energy than the people in the water because of its their location. And so then the diver dives off, so now we have the potential energy getting converted to kinetic energy. All right, these guys have less kinetic energy, and then the climbing up converts kinetic energy of movement, all right, till eventually potential energy as they're standing up on the diving platform, and so on. All right, so let's look at the laws that govern transformation of energy, converting one form of energy into another. This is the laws of thermodynamics. Thermodynamics is the study of energy transformations. So let's recognize laws of thermodynamics. You guys ever had that? Yeah, chemistry maybe? Physics? No? You didn't do it in chemistry? So we'll look at it. A lot of people are more familiar with the first law of thermodynamics and less with the second law. We'll look at each one of these. So a closed system, like for instance liquid in a thermos, is separated or isolated from its surroundings. So basically you don't have the system, the liquid in the thermos is not giving anything out to its surroundings or vice versa. Are living things a closed system, do you think? No, absolutely not. We exchange with our environment. And so we are what we consider an open system. In an open system, energy and matter can be transferred between the system and its surroundings. And that's it, absolutely with us. So that last bullet is organisms are open systems. So let's look at this first law of thermodynamics. This states that the energy of the universe is constant. So the quantity of energy is always going to be the same. Now it doesn't mean that the type of energy is always the same, because we can convert one type of energy into another. So energy can be transferred and transformed. We can convert it from one form to another, but we can't make it or destroy it. It can be neither created nor destroyed. And that's what most people have heard of. You guys have heard of that? Energy can be neither created nor destroyed. All right. just converted from one type to another. Another way to say this first law is the principle of conservation of energy. So it's just another way if you see that. It just means the same thing. So we can't make energy or destroy energy. Second law states that during every energy transfer or transformation, some energy is unusable and often lost as heat. For living things, is heat usable energy? No. All right. So according to this second law, every energy transfer or transformation increases what we call the entropy or disorder of the universe. Okay, so let's look at this particular example here with cellular respiration. So this entropy or disorder of the universe, heat energy increases the disorder of the universe because heat energy is the random movement of particles, all right? So it's a very random, disorderly type of energy. So if we look at the breakdown of glucose, if we look at a glucose molecule, you have this ring with these bonds with this potential or stored energy in them. It's very orderly. When the glucose breaks down into water and carbon dioxide, those bonds have less energy in them, which means that a lot of that energy stored in glucose is released as energy, And so that energy, some of it is energy that's usable. So some energy goes to do work, like for instance, driving, an anabolic reaction. That's the type of reaction that needs energy or pathway. So that's an example of that. But then a lot of that energy, and I'm going to put here a bunch of arrows here, a lot of that energy is released as heat. And heat contributes to entropy or disorder. So do you see that in this reaction, you have more orderly form of potential energy stored in these molecules. That potential energy stored in glucose is now converted to, a lot of that is converted to heat. So we've gone from orderly to more disorderly. And so we have still the same amount of energy on the Earth, it's just now we have more heat energy than we did before. All right, and the heat energy is unusable or increasing the disorder, which we measure as entropy. Another example, just in everyday life, is with fuel, like gasoline. So about a quarter, 25% of chemical energy in fuel actually is transformed into the motion of the car. We're not very efficient, our cars aren't very efficient, meaning that out of all the energy stored in the hydrocarbons, gasoline is a hydrocarbon, there's a lot of energy, a lot of chemical potential energy stored in the bonds of the carbons and hydrogens of gasoline. So we've got a ton of this energy. When we break down gasoline, which is what we're doing when we burn it in our cars, only a small portion, only a quarter of that actually goes towards doing what we want it to do, which is drive the car. A lot of that is released as heat, which is why you feel the engine or feel the hood of the car gets pretty hot if you run the car. That is increasing the entropy. You went from a very orderly molecule, the gasoline, with stored energy in the bonds of that, to now a bunch of heat energy, which is very disorderly. The same thing with all of our appliances. You guys have probably never gone out and bought a refrigerator before. You're too young, but one day you will, all right? And when you look at an appliance, they actually have what's called an energy guide on the appliance. It's usually yellow. And what that does is give you an indication of how energy efficient your appliance is. Well, what does energy efficient mean? So if you buy a refrigerator, when you plug it in, you want the electricity that you're paying for the electric bill, the electricity that's going to your refrigerator, you want a lot of that electricity to actually go towards cooling off your food and freezing your food and so on. But what happens is that it's not usually that energy efficient. So what that guide is doing is telling you how much of that electricity is actually going towards what you want it to do versus being released as heat. And you can feel any appliance in the back, your refrigerator will be hot on the back, all right, and warm because it's releasing a lot of that energy and your electricity as heat. And so my TV is terrible. I've got a flat screen TV. You go up close to that, it's like it's like you want to warm up, all right, next to my TV. I'm not very energy efficient. So that happens in appliances with electrical appliances, but it also happens in our cells with burning glucose and a lot of the energy being released as heat.
When it says that it increases the entropy of the universe, how does that affect us?
It necessarily doesn't until one day, maybe all of the energy, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
millions of years, you know.
Okay.
Right now, it really doesn't.
Okay.
All right, yeah. All right. And most of us don't feel that effect, all right? Unless you feel the effect of my electric bill. The forward motion of the car then, now think about this. So only a quarter of the energy actually went to move your car, but then that kinetic energy of moving, you don't keep on driving forever. You have to stop eventually, and the brakes are converting that energy to heat again, and then you're further increasing the entropy of the universe by stopping your car. Therefore, we can say the quantity of the energy in the universe is constant, but the quality is not, because the entropy is increasing. So, amount stays the same, quality doesn't. Quality goes down by increasing entropy. Now, in living, this picture here, this picture just gives you a visual. Little cheetah here eating his prey. The prey has chemical energy, so we're going to convert. So energy is neither created nor destroyed. The energy is going to go to the cheetah. They're going to use the molecules, the chemical energy in the molecules. They're going to break those down. Carbon dioxide and water are released. Heat energy is released as a result of that. So we've gone from chemical energy, stored energy, to now some of the energy being released as heat, which increases the randomness and the entropy or disorder of the universe. So living things made up of cells do both things. They convert organized forms of energy to heat. And then we also do the opposite. So spontaneous processes occur without energy input, and they can happen quickly or slowly. A better way to describe a spontaneous process, so in order for it to occur without energy input, it must increase the entropy of the universe. So increasing the entropy of the universe is a spontaneous process. So which one, let me ask you this, going back to this picture here, the anabolic or the catabolic pathway, which one could be classified as a spontaneous reaction? I don't remember what the definitions are, you can look back.
Would that be number 2, the catabolic reaction?
The catabolic, this is, we're increasing the entropy, that we're breaking glucose down into water and carbon dioxide, releasing heat energy, and so this increases the entropy of the universe, releases energy in the process, and that is the definition of spontaneous, okay? So that's a little application of that. All right, so in looking at living things, which was what this class is all about, looking at biological order versus disorder. So cells create ordered structures from less ordered ones, creating ordered structures from less ordered materials, and we can also replace ordered forms of matter with less ordered forms. So we can do both of those. So we can build and make very orderly molecules, or we can break down, make less orderly. And so relating this, the evolution of more complex organisms does not violate the second law of thermodynamics. We have very complex organisms that are very ordered and so on. And so therefore you can have an organism in the universe becoming more complex and more orderly while the whole universe is becoming more disorderly. Does that make sense? You can have pieces that become more orderly, but the whole universe becomes more disorderly. And so, so entropy, what we can say is the disorder may decrease in an organism. So an organism can be ordered, but the universe's total entropy increases and becomes disordered. Okay, and that is the first section. At this point, before we go on to the second section, I want to draw your attention to a couple of things here. And the other two things that you picked up with this chapter. The first single sheet, this is not something that's due. And so this is things that you should be able to do. Gives you the big ideas of the different parts of the chapter. So we've just done the first one. And so talks about different types of energy, catabolic and anabolic pathways, and so on. So that's just a checklist and things for you to get the big picture about what you're going to be expected to know. I did things a little bit differently with this one. This is going to be your review, all right? What I wanted for this chapter, I wanted to make it a little bit more complex or more comprehensive about the material. So it's separated based upon section and different questions with the section. So I'm going to treat this just like the review last time, so this will be due when we take our test. You, by all means, should be kind of going along. I can give you kind of, you can look to see where, like we've already done the first section, which is the first 4 questions. We're going to start in just a second, 8.2. And so what I would do to help you out is go through at night and do those ones that, go with what we've done. And that'll kind of give you an idea of, do I understand or do I not understand, and give you some guides to maybe asking questions and so on. All right, so something, I'm not going to check off that you do it every day, and so I'm going to suggest that you do it. Okay? All right. So that's that. All right, so moving on here. So the second section with this chapter is about this thing called free energy. So we want to, biologists, when looking at all the metabolism, all the reactions that occur in a living thing, we want to see which ones occur spontaneously and which ones require energy input. And so we have to study reactions to do that. So we need to determine these energy changes that occur in chemical reactions. So we do this by studying what we call the free energy change. And then it says delta G. Delta in front of something, what does that mean? Change, right? How do you usually figure out the change? In this case, of free energy, it could be delta T, which is temperature. What do we do to figure out the change? No, there's an actual kind of formula.
Isn't it the final minus the initial, then divided by the initial times 100?
That's the percent change, all right? That's the percent change. To just figure out the change is not the percent change. We would just do the first part of what you said, which is final minus initial, okay? All right? So absolutely. So let's talk about, to understand this, we need to understand what G is. And G is this free energy. A living system's free energy, here's the definition, is energy that can do work. And then there's some stipulations when temperature and pressure are uniform, so that doesn't change. And this is true in a living cell. So it's the amount of energy available to do work. So we have this couple of things here. The change in free energy, which is delta G, the energy available to do work, during a process is related to the change in enthalpy, another word here, or what is enthalpy? The change in total energy, which we represent by delta H. and change in entropy, which is represented by T delta S. And T stands for temperature. So we have a formula. Delta G equals delta H minus T delta S. And to understand this, this is one of the formulas on the AP Bio equation sheet that you need to be familiar with. All right, I'm going to put this up here. Let's write a few things about this. Let me erase what I wrote last hour. Okay, so let's write underneath what these things are. I think it would be easier to understand. So delta G. G is the energy available to do work. Energy to do work. So basically, the amount of, so we want to figure out the amount of energy to do work. We have to take, so this is equals, H stands for the total energy. So we take all the total energy available. So we have this glucose molecule here. All right, there's a certain amount of energy in it. When we go through this reaction, some of that energy is available to do work, some of it's not. So we take the total amount of energy in that molecule and subtract any of the unusable energy. The unusable energy is the entropy, the heat and so on of that. And so, so when we subtract the T is the temperature. The S is the entropy. Notice it says T delta S. So if we had numbers for this, what would we do with those numbers?
Multiply them.
Multiply them. So why is that? What's the relationship between temperature and entropy, do you think? Okay.
Entropy, like the changes.
It's not the change in temperature.
It's the heat.
The relationship between them. Okay.
Is temperature a measure of entropy?
Temperature affects entropy. So if the temperature goes up, what do you think happens with entropy?
Goes up.
It goes up as well. If the temperature goes down, entropy goes down. All right? And so therefore, that's a function of this. So that's why we add in temperature, because temperature affects the entropy. All right? And so, so does this make sense? We take the total energy available and subtract any entropy, and we end up with the leftover is the amount available to do work, which is represented by G. So on here, I'm just going to leave this up here for a second here. So the temperature, when we do this, is in Kelvin. Kelvin, remember, is the degrees Celsius plus 273, right? So in order to calculate properly, you have to have in Kelvin. And so let's go through an example here of just a generic equation here. So A plus B, these are your reactants, gets converted to C and D. And so on this, these guys here are your initial, this is your initial state, and this is your final. So that's what I wrote here. So A and B are your initial, so I didn't get it to go right underneath here. So A and B, your initial, C and D are your final state. So then when we study this, we can say then the initial state has, these guys have a certain amount of energy. We call that G, and it's supposed to be sub I. And then the final, these guys are G sub F. So we go from how much free energy are available here versus here. All right, and so to get our delta G, we take final minus initial, which is what we said earlier, to get your delta G. So I'm looking at this equation here. This one right here. Is this, which one has a higher, if we look at the free energy in the reactants versus the products, which ones have a higher free energy or energy available to do work? Glucose and oxygen or water and carbon dioxide? Which one has a higher free energy? Energy available to do work. It is the reactants, all right? These guys here have a higher free energy. The reason why is because, see, this is a reaction that releases energy. So this has more energy stored in the bonds, all right, and therefore energy available to do work. Some of this energy here, these guys have less energy than glucose, and some of that energy that was once in glucose has been released as heat, so that can't do work. So therefore, this is a higher free energy. This side would have a lower free energy. So how in the world do we figure out free energy? So I'm gonna tie this into that delta G equals delta H minus T delta S. So if you know what G is, G final and initial, we can take G final minus G initial. But to calculate that, that's where this equation comes into play. So to calculate G initial, what they do is they take the total energy in these guys here, total energy, which is H, minus the entropy. Notice here that I didn't put deltas in front of anything because delta is taking the final minus the initial. So that equation is already subtracting it. Whereas the GF, how do we get that number? We use total energy of these guys minus TS, all right? And so therefore, once you get that, then you know final and initial, and you can take final minus initial and get your delta G. So therefore, delta G is G final minus G initial. What kind of number is this going to be with this example? We're running out of time. Think about that, all right? Think about that, and we'll pick this up tomorrow. We're about out of time.